The International Court of Justice, the United Nations' highest court, recently delivered a significant ruling. This judgment concerned three small, largely uninhabited islands in the Gulf of Guinea. These islands, however, sit near potentially vast oil reserves. For years, Gabon and Equatorial Guinea both claimed these territories as their own. The dispute simmered, occasionally flaring up, fueled by the promise of black gold beneath the waves. Finally, in 2021, both nations agreed to take their complex case to the judges in The Hague, seeking a definitive legal resolution to a question of borders and belonging that has spanned generations. The world watched as international law was called upon to untangle this intricate web of claims. The roots of this modern-day dispute stretch back over a century. They are found in the colonial era, a time when European powers drew lines across maps of Africa. The ICJ judges looked deep into this history. They focused on a specific agreement, the 1900 Paris Convention. This treaty was signed by France and Spain, the colonial rulers of Gabon and Equatorial Guinea, respectively. Its purpose was to clearly delineate the boundaries between their colonial possessions in this part of Central Africa. Such treaties, though relics of a bygone era, often form the bedrock of post-colonial international borders, a principle known as. The 15-judge panel at the ICJ concluded that this 1900 treaty was the decisive legal instrument. It was this document, they determined, that ultimately settled who owned the islands of Mbanye, Cocotiers, and Congas. According to the court's interpretation of this colonial-era agreement, the islands fell under Spanish sovereignty. Therefore, upon gaining independence, Equatorial Guinea inherited these territorial rights from Spain. This finding became the cornerstone of the entire judgment, overshadowing later attempts to redefine the maritime boundary and island ownership, setting a clear historical precedent for the court's decision. Equatorial Guinea had long argued that the 1900 treaty supported its claim. Historical records indicate that it exercised control over the territory for many decades. This control, however, was challenged in 1972. Gabon's military forces moved in and occupied Mbanye, the largest of the three islands. This action significantly escalated tensions between the two neighbors. The discovery of oil deposits in the surrounding waters in subsequent years only served to further entrench their opposing positions. The islands themselves might have little intrinsic value, but the maritime rights they command are now immensely significant in this resource-rich region of the world. Another key document presented during the proceedings was the 1974 Bata Convention. Gabon placed considerable emphasis on this agreement. They argued that this later convention superseded the 1900 treaty. If valid, the Bata Convention would have awarded the disputed islands to Gabon. This agreement was purportedly signed by the leaders of both nations at the time. It aimed to finally settle their maritime boundaries and, by extension, the ownership of the islands. For Gabon, this document represented a more contemporary and mutually agreed-upon understanding of their shared border, one that reflected their post-independence relationship. However, Equatorial Guinea vehemently contested the validity of the 1974 Bata Convention. They raised serious questions about its legal standing from the outset. Their legal team argued that the document was never properly ratified. They asserted that it did not follow the necessary procedures to become a binding international treaty. Furthermore, there were doubts raised about the circumstances under which it was supposedly agreed. Equatorial Guinea maintained that it could not be considered a legitimate revision of the borders established by the 1900 Paris Convention, which they held as the only true legal basis for determining sovereignty in the disputed area. The International Court of Justice meticulously examined the arguments surrounding the Bata Convention. The judges ultimately sided with Equatorial Guinea on this critical point. They found that the 1974 agreement did not, in fact, possess the force of law. Judge Julia Sebutindi, a prominent member of the judicial panel, was direct in her assessment. She stated that the Bata Convention was not a treaty having the force of law. This declaration effectively nullified Gabon's central argument, dismantling a key pillar of their case for sovereignty over the resource-rich islands. The court found the procedural and substantive flaws too significant to ignore. Adding to the weakness of Gabon's reliance on the Bata Convention was a crucial missing piece of evidence. Gabon was unable to produce an original, signed copy of the 1974 document for the court's inspection. This failure to provide primary evidence further undermined its credibility. In international law, the provenance and authenticity of such documents are paramount. Without the original, the court was left to consider copies whose legal status was, at best, ambiguous. This evidentiary gap, combined with Equatorial Guinea's strong objections, led the ICJ to dismiss the convention's relevance to the case entirely. The dispute over these small islands is not merely about lines on a map or historical pride. It is profoundly linked to the economic lifelines of both Equatorial Guinea and Gabon. Both Central African nations are heavily dependent on oil revenues. Oil exports form the backbone of their economies, funding public services, infrastructure development, and government operations. This reliance makes any potential new source of petroleum incredibly valuable. For decades, this shared dependency has shaped their national trajectories, making control over oil-rich territories a matter of paramount national interest and economic survival. In recent years, both countries have faced a worrying trend, declining production from their existing oil fields. As mature fields begin to deplete, the urgency to find and exploit new reserves has intensified. This economic pressure has undoubtedly fueled the long-standing dispute over the islands. The waters surrounding Mbanye, Cocotiers and Congas are believed to hold significant untapped hydrocarbon potential. Securing sovereignty over these islands means securing the rights to explore and extract these resources, offering a much-needed boost to their respective national treasuries and future economic stability. It was, in fact, the discovery of oil in the coastal waters near the islands that reignited the dormant dispute with renewed vigor. While the islands had been a point of contention before, the prospect of substantial oil wealth dramatically raised the stakes. What might have once been a relatively minor territorial disagreement transformed into a high-stakes contest for economic advantage. The allure of black gold made compromise far more difficult, pushing both nations towards a legal showdown at the International Court of Justice after repeated diplomatic efforts failed to yield a mutually acceptable solution over many years. The ICJ's decision to award the islands to Equatorial Guinea carries profound economic implications. For Equatorial Guinea, this ruling could mean a significant economic uplift. Access to new oil reserves could reverse its declining production trends and provide a fresh stream of revenue for years to come. This could translate into new development projects and improved living standards. Conversely, for Gabon, the judgment represents a potential economic setback, denying them access to resources they had hoped to claim. The decision will force both nations to reassess their economic futures in the Gulf of Guinea. The ruling delivered from the Peace Palace in The Hague was clear and decisive. The International Court of Justice sided with Equatorial Guinea. The judges affirmed that based on the 1900 treaty between former colonial powers Spain and France, the three contested islands, Mbanye, Cocotiers and Congas, belong to Equatorial Guinea. This judgment brings a legal conclusion to a dispute that has troubled relations between the two neighboring states for more than half a century. The court's reliance on historical treaties underscores the enduring impact of colonial-era demarcations on contemporary international borders in Africa and around the world. The case was brought before the 15-judge panel in 2021. This came after numerous attempts to find a diplomatic resolution had failed. Both Gabon and Equatorial Guinea had agreed to abide by the ICJ's binding decision, seeking a peaceful and lawful end to their disagreement. The court meticulously reviewed historical documents, maps, and legal arguments presented by both sides over several years. The final judgment focused on the legal weight and applicability of the colonial-era treaties versus subsequent, less formal understandings, ultimately prioritizing the older, formally established boundary agreement. The court's dismissal of the 1974 Barter Convention was a pivotal moment in the proceedings. As highlighted by Judge Julia Sebutinde, this agreement lacked the force of law required to alter the territorial settlement established in 1900. This stance by the court emphasized the critical importance of proper treaty ratification and the formal processes of international law. It sent a clear message about the types of agreements that can legitimately define or redefine international boundaries. The careful legal reasoning of the court aimed to provide a solid foundation for the resolution, grounded in established international legal principles. Looking ahead, the ICJ's ruling has the potential to significantly reshape diplomatic relations between Gabon and Equatorial Guinea. While international court judgments are binding, the manner in which they are accepted and implemented can vary. The immediate future may see careful diplomatic maneuvering as both nations adjust to this new reality. There is hope that this legal resolution will pave the way for enhanced cooperation on maritime security and resource management in the Gulf of Guinea. However, underlying tensions may persist, requiring continued dialogue and a commitment from both sides to maintain peace and stability in this economically vital region.